Today I'm here as the PI of the work package 2, which is about the financial flows that go into ecological restoration. And now I know that many of our partners are working with projects where financing might not be exactly what I will be talking about today, because I have chosen to focus on what is relevant in a business school context, and that is the intersection between the private sector, corporations, investors, and this field of ecological restoration. And I would say that it's still quite unclear as well there. Who is doing what and what for what purpose and what's actually going on? But let me take you through this, and mostly we are now in the neoliberal market logics that comes with the global environmental governance, and would I had a little bit more of a time, then I would also have given you the frameworks, which is the UNFCCC, UNCBD, and the Land and Degradation Fund that comes from UN what's it called? The UN. There's one more.
United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification.
This
UNCCD.
Yes, and all of them, what I have been studying, are mentioning private capital as essential for restoring land and for climate action and for biodiversity. But they are going into different fields of what land is, one could say. So if land is a carbon sink in UNFCCC, mostly very much focused on carbon. Today also other parts are coming in. In CBD, we're looking at land and forests through the biodiversity lens, and in the combating desertification, it's more of a farming and agroforestry maybe is what comes up. So those are the frameworks there. But I will not go into depth about that. I will show you a few cases, one could say, of different financial systems that are doing things on the land with trees and forests sometimes, and sometimes less so. But we are in what has developed since 1992, basically, in that field. The legacies of the other two are still playing a role. So, of course, the colonial legacy, the scientific part of these projects are very strong as well. Well, 4 shades of green and probably more. Why are corporations suddenly interested in ecological restoration? And I would say maybe not all corporations are talking about ecological restoration yet, but I think it is coming stronger in their discourses. And I have not done a systemic discourse analysis of how they frame this field. So I am bringing together many different investments and actions that are going on. And the first one is this, what I just mentioned with the overall UN frameworks, compliance with multilateral environmental governance. We hear such things as no net loss, net zero, everything that's going on each of these UN frameworks, COP meetings, is basically about governance and how to comply. This part is not about a social license to operate, but actually having a license to operate in the field, or to signal that we are working with climate change, we are working with the ecological crisis at a global scale. Then what I see in the literature very often mentioned is this financialization of nature, banking nature. We heard that also yesterday at lunch, we were talking about that, where accumulation by restoration, as Amber has written about, it's about finding ways to make profit from either these carbon and biodiversity credits, but I will show that it's much broader than that. It's also about complying with sustainability investment reporting, where we actually overlap a little bit with the compliance as well, and with CSR and legitimacy building. So when we talk about corporations, very often we hear greenwashing. And I don't actually like the word greenwashing, Because when we're talking about ecological restoration, tree planting, any kind of intervention, actually, it's not, and not even CSR in a general sense. I've written extensively on the political ontology of CSR. There's always an intervention. There's no washing. It's changing something on the ground as well. So it's one could say it's a sophisticated way of greenwashing, but it's not just commercials and it's not just words. Something is happening somewhere, and it has impacts on people's lives. But this part that I've now labeled here as marketing is very much about the public pressures that are coming on corporations that are considered maybe brown, and they want to have a more green image. So they engage and invest in something related to ecological restoration to improve their reputation. And the final one would be about logistics and sourcing. A lot of corporations are realizing if they don't take care of the land, there are no materials left for them. So there's been this Das Gupta report that was precisely about this, how we have to change our sourcing policies that it doesn't degrade and destroy land, but actually rebuild it in order to deal with all the legacy of all the extractive practices that have been in the past, and to shift it around towards a regenerative business model. Here we come into companies that are working with global supply chains. It can be timber, but very often coffee. We have cosmetics. We have a lot of companies that are concerned about the risks of not having access to the resources they need in the future to make a profit. All of this, of course, and there might be more of this, but I'm saying that there are different logics going into different financial flows if we're looking at corporations. But in general, we're talking about green transition, greening the economy, the bioeconomy, which is trying to also reframe what corporations are, so they are not these extractive villains, but actually they are sources of hope, if we say. So reframing the corporate world, capitalism, if you want, in a green new light, where they can be the solution and not the problem. And of course, I have written quite critically on CSR and such before, so many of you know my standpoint on that point, that playing around with capitalism, turning it green might not, for local communities and many others, be the best way of solving it. But this organization network has a lot of power, and this is going on, and this is what is affecting many lives. So why forests? I've just here, I think I mentioned also yesterday, it's come up here, but it's actually quite convenient, except for just that it's easy to scale with forests and do this satellite and modeling on forests. But if you look at all the frameworks and strategies, there's both the productive, the climate, and the biodiversity, but also UN Sustainable Development Goals that kind of helps us to imagine a hopeful future world that is green with forests. So all of these with different imaginations of what the forest is are playing into our imaginations of forests are a very good thing to invest in, different kinds of forests, if one say. This is what we're working with Sen, a doctoral student at University of Helsinki. We are working on mapping and understanding actually the conditionality that comes with different financial systems. And please do not get stuck on all the words here. I tried to reduce, but there's quite a lot. But here is kind of just a very diversified landscape of different systems. And here there's also a little bit of blended of public and private finance. And I am acknowledging there's quite a lot of public finance that is sustaining and de-risking a lot of the investment that go in. But at least as I see it, what's interesting to look is on the private side of it. So when I'm talking about grant-based climate finance, I'm very interested in what's going on in the philanthropy area of rich philanthropists that want to save the world. Like, for example, the Bezos Earth Fund. So So Amazon owner Bezos has also his own hands in it. I'll do a little bit of overview of this because this is way too much. And how much time do I have left? So I know how much I need to speed up. I have 10 minutes. So now let's do a quick overview. Philanthropic donations. These come with, these are not part of the corporate world per se. It's what those that own the corporations gain, the results that they then decide on their own what they would like to use for. Philanthropy has a long stand in corporate charity, as a corporate charity. You can find it back to the Victorian age of the 1800s in England already. But today it's becoming increasingly green. Patagonia now investing all of its results in philanthropic work, and a lot of it in Chile, actually, I know. Problem with this, Bezos Earth Fund has been a very detrimental in many places in Africa in setting up carbon forests, in helping that kind of topics. Problem that comes with this is, of course, we could call it a kind of a greenwashing of the billionaires. So they become, instead of having democratic processes, now it's the billionaires that decide where are the funding going. But there's another thing, and it's really opaque. You don't really know what they decide in these funding bodies, philanthropic funding bodies, why they choose to invest in one place and not in another. There might be political motives. We here who depend on funding from external resources such as private funds, we also know that when we write our project applications, we seldomly know what goes on behind the scene, why our project is chosen or not chosen. The same goes for these things. It's a little bit difficult to trace transparency in the topic. And there comes, of course, many different implications in terms of politics, as my colleague Carl Rhodes from Australia has written this book on Stinking Rich and the Four Myths of the Good Billionaire. He criticizes actually quite harshly Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia and his way of dealing with the climate crisis as also building his own legacy into the future. Mozambique case in Brazil, something familiar to our Brazilian VP work package? No? So here we have one that is more of a blended finance model. World Bank and HSBC Bank provide loans, or there's like an overlap with loans and bonds to private company, this Mozambique, that is then working towards restoring in the Amazon region by planting native trees. This is, of course, if our project would be much longer, we would like to see what actually goes there. And I would ask, Marcus, could you please go and visit in your next visit? Another really interesting is this from Indonesia, a joint venture between French tire manufacturer Michelin and the Indonesian Barito Pacific Group, where the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility emitted a bond. It was also backed up by BNP and Paribas. We have both, surprisingly, rubber trees, so productive and monocultural landscape of rubber trees for the Michelin tires, but there's also a conservation site. It follows the RED principle, but there are no, as I've understood, credits or payments for ecosystem services. It's paid through this kind of supply chain investment system. Once the bond was repaid, Michelin bought the whole joint venture, so they are now the whole owner of this Indonesian project. Another one would be interesting to visit and see what's going on. I mentioned this yesterday, UPM and Stora Enso, they're emitting green bonds. Stora Enso does it based on their forest in Sweden. In Finland, UPM has a different science-based approach based on calculations that Luke has done. But investments do go into Global South. For example, the pulp mill construction of the Pasos del Toro in Uruguay has been used for the green bonds that have emitted. And It's also another thing I would like to see is how the pension funds are involved, because they like to have these green investments, so they might be investors in these projects as well. Fine prints on how the climate logics work can be found in their financing, green and sustainability financing reports and sustainability reports. I mentioned this yesterday, although the forest might be cut down, if it goes to construction material, the carbon is not lost. And these are monoculture tree plantations, but they might be framed as afforestation projects. CSR-like project, well, Case Shell is working with a lot of NGOs, both on developing frameworks on how to calculate restoration and carbon sequestration and increase the credibility of these projects that way, but then also with local NGOs and indigenous communities in terms of implementing restoration. So conveniently enough, in the Niger Delta region, there are restoration projects going on by Shell, and this is a typical contested field of CSR where we have public pressure of what's going on in Nigeria with oil extraction and then some restoring on the side. So then we have equity-based impact investment, for example, the Mirova Natural Capital Fund. Again, Amazon is a hotspot for investments. I guess it's also a good place to attract investments into. It was called Atelia, but now it's Mirova Amazon Fund. It provides equity to smaller and long-term projects on agroforestry, such as cocoa and coffee, sustainable cattle, supply chains, and forest restoration. Here, of course, it's not about repaying loans or repaying the bonds. It's about accumulation and returns to investors. So it's investors and not loan or givers or bond givers. So another interesting one where is this kind of global supply chains, the Livelihood Fund, which was formed by Danone and Mars, I think. So those do need inputs into their supply chain from different tropical areas. And this livelihood fund has a lot of ecological restoration sites. And you can see this one I didn't manage to finish on time. I have a little bit of all my web pages you can see there on the side. But this is a big one with a lot of different corporate partners involved. And there are also the GEF, for example. So it's not just corporate. There are also the multilateral ones that are involved. And to finalize, I want to mention there are alternatives that are rising that are not these kind of corporate private, but are more community-driven private. For example, the grassroots economics. We have a podcast with a person that is involved with the grassroots economics initiative in Kenya. And this one works actually with alternative currencies. I don't have time to explain the model. It's something I would like to look into more, but it's based on building trust between people, and Kenya has an alternative currency that has been developed for a long time, and they have actually started to try to design that with the community being strongly involved. I think there is some philanthropic support as well in this initiative. And this is just an overview. I have no conclusions. I just want to say we're not just talking about one system of financialized natures. There are multiple different, and they have consequences for how locals can be involved, how they gain something from it, and how much of this kind of green grabbing occurs. So, and what kind of, if we're talking about green grabbing as appropriation of land, then sometimes it might be that the land is not owned by foreign actors. It's in other forms that local communities start to serve foreign actors. And how that then works on the ground is something that we would need to actually, for a longer period, connect our research and see how it influences and identify these projects. But I am done. I hope I didn't take too much time, because now we will actually hear more from somebody who has worked with this.
10 minutes for you to have question answer.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
So our morning presentations, because they are quite different, I will invite Maria back after the keynote if we want to do more questions there too, but we've thought that it would be nice to have a little moment, since this financialization is kind of its own topic, to do a couple of questions. So is there, I invite online if you want to use the chat area to ask questions, or if anybody in the room has any questions about what we just heard about the financialization.
Oh, I could say one more thing. Often we think of carbon markets as the only one that is actually driving the field, but that's not the case. And it's very small part, but it's visible, very visible.
Not everybody at once, okay, Marita?
Thank you so much. I was just wondering, because you looked into these like big Bezos Earth Fund and these initiatives. I was wondering, have you been able? Is it possible to trace, like, in which countries they work, or do they work in our project countries, for example?
Bezos Earth Fund, if I remember the projects that are emblematic, that they make visible. This is what I'm saying. We cannot know everywhere where their funding goes. Some of these philanthropic foundations have good databases. Rockefeller has a really good database, and I got myself into it, but I haven't had time to look at it. And Rockefeller is not so known for working on ecological restoration, but they might have some. This Bezos Earth Fund is focused on that. So Western Africa, they had projects. So it wasn't our partner countries. But as I said, it's not often even that they mention where the money goes. So.
Marcus.
Yeah, thanks. Do you have any estimate of these, like which is the biggest one in monetary terms, and in total, if this private setting is bigger in comparison to the public or multilateral, like World Bank and multilateral lending agencies, and also national development banks, like the Brazilian Development Bank, which has the budget twice the size of World Bank. So
No numbers.
So directly, and then like intermediaries or private funding.
I think this is extremely difficult to do research on. That would take, I don't know even how to do it. Like, how would you know? I don't think there are any such databases or somewhere to go to look for that. Like the way that I now presented was by presenting cases to show you, and like green bonds is what they talk about. When it's sustainability bonds, if social impact is also included. Green is if it's about restoring or planting more environment. Then it's called sustainability bonds if they have these social indications. They are all different. So how am I going to find out? Like I have a feeling that green bonds are becoming very strong of all of these, but they are backed also by, for example, World Bank to de-risk them or other systems. So I don't know how to map and categorize these things. They go into each other, many of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so I hear in my work those people planning this and who have a lot of good ideas and good purposes, but from your perspective, so I want opposite opinion, like what is one or two main problems in this kind of?
It's of course an increase of land being under control of the corporate world. And whether it's in the hands of the corporations or it's the hand of the communities, it's the corporations. And one central actor, especially when the carbon markets, I didn't actually have any examples of the carbon markets, which we had. Market transaction-based finance, I guess the Shell case would be one of those. But it's not the corporations that control it. It's not the NGOs that control it. It's actually Verra is a very strong voluntary carbon market actor that defines how people can move around in the land. And they define how carbon is also calculated. So I would say that in this field, there are new actors that become very strong in governing the land, and they are not local. And then there's another issue is, of course, that it creates new social hierarchies in the place based on who is gaining and who is losing from it, which we see clearly in the Ethiopian case as well.
Sonia?
Mentioned it a little bit related to the like rich people philanthropists that they're like really hard to track. But how about for the others? Like how hard is it to track these value chains? Because something that I think we noticed in Madagascar that a lot of people are seemingly involved, but then they all sort of do it through this like one NGO.
Yeah.
Or
Oh, you're now talking about market transaction-based finance, most probably.
like yeah, just like
Because the other ones, I mean, it depends on what it is. I would say, of course, like it's opaque, all of them, and some of them are like reported as this is kind of not something that needs to be public reported. But when it's a public company like Stora Enso and UPM, they have their sustainability reports that they have to have, and you can go and read the definitions, at least, of how they calculate what it is that they calculate. On the other hand, no, it's not clear where the money goes.
and you don't know who is doing it on the ground.
Well, in the case of if they're building a pulp mill in Uruguay, I know that it's the contractors of the UPN that are there. Or if they're planting, extending their forest plantations in Brazil through Marcus, I would pretty much know who are the actors involved. So that's industrial forestry then. But it's a little bit problematic when it's then framed as something of ecological restoration, because it's the same that model that has always been there. Yeah, which is a little bit also an answer to you.
One question.
Last question.
Are there like some kind of network between these different types of like financing? Have they been formed? Do you know about that?
It seems that they are quite nation-based as well. So Finland would have their own, like we would have FinFund, and we would have like the forestry sector that are the usual forestry sector actors are involved. And then we see like the Tire and the Danone. So then we have like the French banks are involved. So it seems like on that level, then I cannot say on a multilateral level, but it seems like it's very nation-driven actually. The networks, like if it's a funding for a French corporation, then it's French banks involved. And if it's funding for Finnish corporations, then it might also be pension funds involved in investing in the bonds.